Why was everyone staring at her? The morning sun burned across the asphalt parade ground, bleaching every crease of the recruits' uniforms until they shimmered like mirrors. Sweat crawled down Sarah Martinez's spine beneath the thick navy fabric, but she didn't move. Movement meant attention. Attention meant mockery. The line of trainees stood frozen for inspection, rows of shaved heads, clenched jaws, and trembling hands gripping rifles polished to perfection. Somewhere in the middle of that formation stood Sarah, 5'4", 120 pounds, posture rigid enough to hide the storm beneath her skin. She could feel the laughter before she heard it. "Look at her," a voice whispered 2 bodies down. "What's a girl like that doing here? She looks like she should be serving lattes, not carrying rifles." The ripple of laughter that followed was soft but cruel, the kind of cruelty people save for when they think they're being funny. Sarah stared straight ahead. She promised herself, not today. Every day at boot camp had been a contest between what they saw and what she believed. They saw small, fragile, out of place. She believed, at least she tried to, that she could belong here. But belief was a thin shield when you were surrounded by people waiting for you to fail. A bead of sweat slid down her temple. She counted her breaths, forcing calm. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She could hear her brother's voice somewhere behind the noise. "They'll test you until you forget who you are. Don't let them decide that for you." Miguel had said that years ago, before he shipped out on his last deployment. Before the phone call. Before the folded flag. The whistle shrieked. "Eyes front," barked the drill instructor. The laughter died instantly. Boots snapped together. Silence fell like a blade. Sarah focused on the horizon beyond the base fence, the thin blue line of ocean that promised freedom and reminded her why she was here. She'd come to serve, to build something from the fragments Miguel left behind. But the horizon blurred when another black SUV pulled up near the command building. Officers. High-ranking. Unusual for inspection day. The murmurs started immediately. "Who's that? Looks like brass from special warfare. Maybe someone's getting kicked out." From where she stood, Sarah could make out a tall man stepping out of the SUV. Crisp uniform. No nonsense in his posture. The kind of presence that changes the air around him. Even the drill instructors straightened. "Commander Mitchell," one of them whispered. Sarah had read about him. James Mitchell, Navy SEAL, combat legend. The man who saw through pretense and picked the few who had the heart for the impossible. She never thought she'd see him in person. He was a ghost story turned flesh, the kind of name whispered in barracks when recruits wondered what greatness looked like. Mitchell walked the line with his hands behind his back, boots crunching rhythmically across gravel. He didn't bark or glare, he simply looked. That was worse. His eyes moved like scanners, reading posture, attitude, the small betrayals people made when they thought no one noticed. When his gaze reached her section, Sarah's breath locked. "Don't blink, don't fidget." The base commander spoke softly beside him, explaining the progress of the current training cycle. "Good group this year, sir. A few are struggling with the physical standards." Mitchell nodded, still watching the formation. Then, for the briefest second, his eyes settled on her. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for her stomach to twist. He saw her. And yet, after that heartbeat of connection, he moved on. The moment ended. Relief mixed with disappointment as the officers continued their tour. She hadn't realized until then how desperately she'd wanted someone, anyone, to see her as more than the punchline in a uniform. When the whistle finally released them from formation, chatter exploded across the ranks. The usual jeers followed her as she picked up her gear. "Guess they needed a mascot," someone muttered. She ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of her boots. One step, then another. "Martinez." She turned. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, a brick-built man with a voice that could crack concrete, was pointing directly at her. "You're with the Advanced Combat Training Group today." The words didn't make sense. Advanced Group. That slot was reserved for the best performers, the ones who made push-ups look like breathing. "Are you sure, Sergeant?" asked Johnson, her loudest critic. "Shouldn't that be for people who can actually finish the course?" Rodriguez's head snapped toward him. "Did I ask for your opinion, Johnson? Move." The laughter this time was nervous, uncertain. Sarah felt every stare as she slung her pack over her shoulder and walked toward the advanced range. The whispers trailed her like ghosts. She didn't know that Commander Mitchell, standing near the admin building, had just given Rodriguez that order personally. The advanced course was held on the far side of the training grounds, quiet, isolated, a place where recruits either proved themselves or disappeared. Only 8 had been chosen. The rest would hear stories later, exaggerated and half-believed. The air smelled of metal and pine sap. Obstacles loomed like jungle ruins. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the instructor, waited beside a tactical table scattered with maps and gear. "Listen up," he said. "You're running a modified special operations assessment. This isn't about who's strongest or fastest. It's about who thinks, who adapts, who refuses to quit." Sarah glanced around. Every other face belonged to someone who'd mocked her at least once. Johnson, Stevens, Garcia, all bigger, louder, more certain. She swallowed hard. Williams pointed to a map. "Scenario, simple. You're behind enemy lines. Retrieve intel, extract a wounded teammate, reach the extraction point within 2 hours. You'll deal with simulated fire, equipment failures, and every obstacle I can throw at you. Understood?" "Yes, Chief," 8 voices shouted. Hers was the quietest. They began at a river crossing. Fast current, slick rocks, 1 rope and pulley. The obvious solution favored muscle, but the rope's weight limit demanded finesse. "Martinez should go first," Garcia said with a grin. "She's the only one light enough not to snap it." More laughter. Sarah said nothing. She clipped her harness, checked the knot, and started across. The water was cold enough to steal breath, but her mind moved faster than her body. She remembered nights spent studying manuals online, diagrams of rope tension and anchor points. Each motion precise, each knot tied with memory's muscle. Halfway across, the current jerked, but she adjusted effortlessly, sliding to the far bank and securing the line. When the others crossed, there was silence. Not respect, yet, but something quieter, the beginning of reconsideration. From a distant hill, Mitchell watched through binoculars. He'd seen arrogance crumble before. What interested him was resilience, the kind that couldn't be taught by yelling. The second challenge came inside a mock building rigged with laser alarms. One wrong move, and the system reset. Stevens studied the layout. "We'll need someone small enough to crawl through the ventilation shaft." His eyes flicked toward her, this time without mockery. "You claustrophobic, Martinez?" "No, sir." "Good, you're up." The shaft was narrow, dark, metal biting into her knees. Every scrape echoed like thunder in the confined space. Her heartbeat became the only rhythm. She visualized each corner, each drop. When she finally emerged in the target room, she disabled the alarm in 30 seconds and signaled the team. They entered, finished the sequence, and regrouped. Johnson gave a short nod. "Nice work," 2 words heavier than any insult. The final test was the hardest, a simulated casualty evacuation. A 180-pound dummy representing a wounded teammate had to be carried a mile through uneven terrain while under mock fire. Sarah knew what that meant: pain, failure waiting to happen. "I'll take first shift," she said before anyone else could volunteer. "Martinez, you sure?" Stevens asked. "Save your energy." "No, we're a team. Everyone carries their weight." The dummy hit her shoulders like a sack of wet stone. Every muscle screamed. Her legs trembled. Her lungs felt like glass. 50 yards in, the world narrowed to pulse and gravel. She bit her tongue to stay silent. Mitchell, still observing, felt the same flicker he'd felt years ago in combat, the moment when a person's limit breaks and something new steps through. She was shaking, yes, but not stopping. When she finally staggered, Garcia silently took the load. No laughter this time, only the heavy breathing of people who just watched something they didn't understand. By the time they reached the extraction point, Sarah's uniform was streaked with dirt and blood from her bitten lip. She stood at attention during debriefing, barely hearing Chief Williams praise their teamwork. The words that mattered most weren't spoken. They were in the glances exchanged between her teammates, hesitant, changed. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. As the others dispersed, Sarah loosened her sleeves to cool down. She didn't notice Mitchell approaching. The fabric slid just enough to reveal a trace of ink on her forearm. A curve of a serpent entwined with what looked like the edge of a compass rose. Mitchell froze. The sound of his boots stopped mid-stride. It couldn't be. That design, he'd seen it before, half hidden beneath a torn uniform in Kandahar. Sarah realized too late. She tugged her sleeve down, heart slamming against her ribs, but Mitchell had already seen. Recruit Martinez, his voice cut through the air. A word. Every conversation on the field died instantly. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She stepped forward, aware of the watching eyes, the whispers that would follow. "The rest of you are dismissed," Mitchell ordered. When the field cleared, he studied her, not with suspicion but with something deeper, recognition laced with disbelief. "That's an interesting tattoo," he said quietly. "Where did you get it?" Her throat felt dry. She'd never been good at lying. "It's a long story, sir." "I have time," he replied, "and something tells me it's worth hearing." She inhaled, slow, steady. "My brother designed it for me before he died." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Name?" "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, sir. Army 75th Ranger Regiment." The silence that followed carried weight. Mitchell's gaze drifted somewhere far away. Dust, gunfire, a desert sun. "Miguel Martinez," he repeated softly. "Tall, carried a compass his grandfather gave him. Could navigate through a sandstorm without missing a step." Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew him?" "I served with him," Mitchell said. 3 missions. He saved my life once." The world tilted. For a moment, she wasn't standing on a training field but back home, listening to her brother laugh across the dinner table. "When did you lose him?" Mitchell asked. 3 years ago," she whispered. "IED 4th deployment. He was supposed to come home the next month." Mitchell's expression hardened, then softened again. "That compass on your arm, it's his, isn't it?" She nodded. "He always said it would bring him home safe. After he didn't, I had it tattooed so he'd always be with me." "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" "Because I wanted to earn my place, sir, not his." For the first time that day, Mitchell smiled, a brief, almost invisible thing. "Your brother talked about you all the time, said you'd make a better medic than most of us combined." The words hit harder than any insult ever had. She blinked away tears. "He's the reason I'm here." Mitchell nodded slowly. "And he's the reason I'm not dead. Seems I owe your family twice." The sun was dropping, shadows lengthening across the training field. Sarah stood silent as the commander looked out over the horizon. "The others give you trouble?" he asked. "Nothing I can't handle." "I'm sure," he said, "but you shouldn't have to. Your brother used to tell me the strongest people are the ones who don't need to prove it. They just keep showing up." Her voice was small but steady. "He said that to me too." Mitchell turned back, studying her with new eyes. "Tell me, Martinez, what do you want from all this? Just to finish basic or something more?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I want to serve where it matters most. Special operations if I'm good enough." "You might be," he said quietly, "but good enough won't be what gets you there. Heart will." For the first time since boot camp began, Sarah felt something close to belief. Real, solid, dangerous belief. Mitchell's voice softened. "Your brother once saved my life. Maybe it's time I help you find yours." The The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the field painted in gold and shadow. Somewhere beyond the base, the ocean kept its rhythm, steady as breath. And for the first time, Sarah Martinez felt that maybe, just maybe, she'd stopped being the girl everyone doubted and started becoming the soldier her brother had always seen. How much could one conversation change a life? That question followed Sarah through the night like a heartbeat she couldn't quiet. After lights out, the barracks were filled with the rustle of uniforms and low murmurs, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mitchell's face, the disbelief when he recognized the tattoo, the weight in his voice when he said her brother's name. 3 years she had carried Miguel's memory alone, convinced no one left in uniform even remembered him. And then, by accident, she had revealed a mark that tied her entire hidden story to a commander who had lived it beside him. Fate had a strange sense of timing. At reveille, she rose before the whistle. The air outside was cool and salt-sharp, the horizon barely brushed with light. She jogged to the parade field as if motion could stop her mind from spinning. He said heart matters most, she thought. But heart wasn't something you could measure in push-ups or timed sprints. Heart was what you clung to when everything else had been stripped away. By the time she returned to the barracks, whispers had started. Someone had seen her talking with Mitchell. Someone else claimed he'd asked for her personally. Rumor moved faster than truth in boot camp, and by breakfast, half the recruits thought she was related to an admiral. Johnson sat across from her, pretending not to stare. The same Johnson who'd once said she'd never make it past week 2. He hesitated, then muttered, "So, you and the commander." She didn't look up. He asked about a tattoo, that's all. "Yeah, right," he said, trying to sound casual but failing. "People don't get summoned by SEAL commanders for tattoos." "Maybe they do when those tattoos belong to the people who saved his life," she answered softly. The words silenced him. When she left the mess hall, the world felt heavier, not from judgment but expectation. For the first time, people looked at her as if she might actually matter. It was uncomfortable. She had spent weeks trying to disappear. Now she was being pulled into the center of attention she never asked for. Before she could report for regular drills, Sergeant Rodriguez intercepted her. "Martinez, Commander Mitchell wants you in the briefing room 700. Bring your gear." Her heart kicked against her ribs. "Sir, am I in trouble?" Rodriguez's grin was unreadable. "Depends on how you define trouble." By the time she reached the command building, the rest of the recruits were running laps under a blazing sky. She could hear their boots pounding against the asphalt as she entered the cool shadow of the briefing room. Inside stood Mitchell and 2 strangers. Both wore uniforms stripped of insignia, their posture far too calm to be ordinary instructors. "Recruit Martinez," Mitchell said. "This is Master Chief Peterson and Lieutenant Commander Hayes. They're here to conduct a specialized assessment." Peterson looked like he'd been carved from old iron, gray hair, lined face, eyes that missed nothing. Hayes was younger, compact, movements measured and deliberate, the kind of person who carried authority without having to raise her voice. "Sir," Sarah said, snapping to attention. Mitchell gestured for her to stand easy. "We're aware you completed most of a paramedic program before enlisting." "Yes, sir." Hayes crossed her arms. "We're going to see how that knowledge translates under combat stress." Sarah felt a tremor of uncertainty. "Am I being tested for disqualification?" Peterson's voice was low, gravelly. "For potential." They moved to a training bay, a dim hangar transformed into a chaos of sound and motion. Sirens blared. Smoke from simulated explosions filled the air. Mannequins lay scattered across the floor, blood-like fluid pooling beneath them. "Scenario begins on my mark," Hayes said. "Treat, triage, and make the hard calls. You'll have 15 minutes, go." The blast of a starter horn drowned thought. Sarah dropped to her knees beside the first casualty, assessing airway, breathing, circulation. She barked orders that no one followed. She was alone. Another explosion rattled the walls, dust raining from the rafters. She forced herself to focus. The body in front of her had a femoral bleed, tourniquet, pressure. Next, a second mannequin was gasping pneumothorax, needle decompression. Her hands shook, but the muscle memory took over. Somewhere in the smoke, Peterson's voice called out, "Incoming fire. You've got 30 seconds to move or die." She grabbed both mannequins by their webbing and dragged them behind a simulated barrier, heart hammering. Sweat blurred her vision, her gloves were slick. She could almost feel Miguel's presence beside her, calm even in chaos. Breathe, think, act. When the horn sounded again, the world froze. Smoke thinned. Silence settled. Peterson stepped forward. "How do you think you did?" Sarah forced a breath. "3 stabilized, 1 beyond help. I managed pain and airway until evacuation." Hayes checked her clipboard. "Accurate. You maintained decision-making under duress." Mitchell hadn't spoken yet. He stood at the edge of the smoke, arms folded, studying her like a puzzle. Finally he said, "How would you feel about accelerated training for a specialized medical role?" She blinked. "Sir, I'm offering you a chance to continue basic training on a parallel track. Advanced medical, tactical field operations, combat rescue. If you accept, you'll be held to the highest standards, and failure isn't forgiven easily." Her pulse spiked. "Why me?" Peterson answered before Mitchell could. "Because you kept 5 people alive while everything around you burned. Because when the noise hit, you didn't freeze. That's rare." Mitchell stepped closer. "Your brother earned his place through merit. You've already started doing the same. This isn't charity, it's recognition." Sarah swallowed hard. The weight of the opportunity felt almost unbearable. "I'll do it, sir." "Then be ready," Mitchell said. "Your new schedule starts tomorrow, 400 sharp." When she returned to the barracks that night, exhaustion warred with adrenaline. The room was half dark, the rest of the recruits already asleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the ventilation. For months she'd been trying to survive one day at a time. Now the horizon had shifted. At 400 the next morning, before even the bugle sounded, she was on the training field waiting. The sky was ink blue, the air sharp with dew. Peterson appeared out of the mist like some ghost of wars long past. "Let's see what you're made of, Martinez." The next hours blurred into something between endurance and revelation. She learned to carry wounded soldiers twice her size using leverage instead of muscle. She rappelled down walls while inserting IV lines, performed emergency surgery while being dragged across rough terrain, treated simulated burns in smoke so thick it burned her lungs. "Medicine in combat isn't about perfection," Peterson growled during one session. "It's about improvisation. You save lives when everything's going wrong." Her hands ached, her shoulders screamed, but beneath the exhaustion there was something new, a rhythm. For the first time, she wasn't fighting to prove she belonged. She was becoming the thing she had always wanted to be. At dusk, Mitchell arrived during her debrief. "How are you holding up?" "I'm learning that I'm stronger than I thought," she said, wiping sweat from her face. "But this is harder than anything I've done." He nodded. Miguel said the same thing. "The hardest part isn't the blood or the chaos, it's living with the weight of every life you couldn't save." The words hit like a quiet truth she hadn't dared name. She remembered the night of Miguel's funeral, the silence of folded flags, the way her mother had clutched that compass and whispered, "He was supposed to come home." Now that compass was inked into her skin, and every heartbeat felt like a promise to finish what he'd started. Days became weeks. The training stripped away fear the same way the desert strips color from stone, slowly, relentlessly, until what remained was raw and real. When Peterson barked commands, she obeyed without hesitation. When Hayes threw impossible medical puzzles at her, she solved them through instinct and stubborn will. Each failure hurt, but each success planted something solid inside her, confidence built from scars. Word began to spread. Other recruits whispered about the special program. Some said she was being groomed for intelligence work, others for covert missions. Nobody knew the truth, and she didn't correct them. One evening in the common area, Stevens approached her. "Martinez, rumor is you're training for special ops. That true?" She looked up from her notes. "I'm training for a medical specialization. That's all I can say." He nodded slowly. "I used to think being strong meant lifting more than the next guy. Now I'm starting to think it means not giving up when it hurts." "Strength takes different shapes," she said. From across the room, Johnson added quietly, "Guess I had to watch you bleed for it to make sense." He hesitated then. "I was an idiot, Martinez. I joined thinking toughness was loud. You've proved it's quiet." Sarah didn't smile, but she nodded. "Then learn from it." The conversations were small, fleeting, but each one reshaped the air around her. The mockery was gone, replaced by something closer to respect, or perhaps humility. Late one night, she sat outside the barracks, the base lights glowing against the horizon. Mitchell joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too much noise in my head." He handed her a cup. "That doesn't stop. You just get better at living with it." For a moment they sat in silence, the distant hum of the ocean filling the space between words. "Sir," she said finally, "why me? You could have picked anyone." Mitchell's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Because you remind me of him, not just in how you work, but in what drives you. Miguel believed some people are meant to serve where it costs the most, because that's where the work matters most." She looked down at her hands, raw from the day's training. "I think I understand that now." "Good," he said quietly, "because the real test hasn't even started." When she asked what he meant, he didn't answer. He simply stood, tipped his coffee in farewell, and walked back toward the lights, leaving her alone with the sea breeze and the echo of his words. She stared at the horizon until dawn, realizing that whatever waited ahead, missions, pain, fear, she was already past the point of turning back. Somewhere deep down, she knew Miguel would have understood. Because sometimes purpose doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It begins with silence, with a single decision whispered into the dark: keep going. How do you prepare to save lives in a world built to destroy them? That question haunted Sarah through every dawn and dusk of the next phase of training. The days bled together in shades of gray and sand. Sleep became a luxury, pain became a constant, and failure wasn't an option. It was a lesson that arrived with bruises and blisters. Her mornings began before the others even stirred. 400. The field was still cloaked in darkness, air thick with salt and diesel. She ran drills under floodlights that cast long shadows, each breath tasting like metal. Peterson stood nearby, stopwatch in hand, voice low but cutting. "Speed, not the goal, Martinez. Control is. Chaos never waits for you to catch your breath." She didn't reply. Her focus was on the stretcher in front of her, a full-grown man acting as a casualty. She lifted, adjusted, balanced, carried. When her arms gave out, Peterson made her start over. When her knees buckled, he told her to crawl. By sunrise, she'd already done more than most recruits did in a day. Then came tactical medicine, IVs in simulated blackout conditions, triage while running through smoke, improvised tourniquets using belts, cords, or whatever she could find. The mantra was simple: no perfect conditions, only perfect intent. Hayes pushed her differently. Where Peterson demanded physical endurance, Hayes demanded presence of mind, thinking in the middle of chaos. One morning, Hayes set up a simulation without warning. Sirens blared, smoke poured from a doorway, and inside the air was thick with shouting and fake gunfire. 2 wounded, 1 unstable, limited supplies, Hayes barked. "Clock's ticking, you're under fire, go." Sarah sprinted inside. The room was dim, red strobes flashing through smoke. She found one casualty screaming with a chest wound, another unconscious, bleeding heavily from the leg. Her hands moved on instinct, pressure, dressing, tourniquet. Then the simulation added another twist. "Radio down," Hayes shouted. "You're alone, evac unavailable." Sarah froze for half a heartbeat. Alone, 2 patients, both critical, the kind of nightmare every medic fears. She forced herself to breathe. Miguel's voice echoed in her head, "When you can't save everyone, save the ones you can." She stabilized the chest wound first, using the seal patch, listening for breathing. Then she returned to the leg wound, applying the tourniquet tighter, checking pulse, ignoring the tremor in her own fingers. When time ran out, Hayes killed the lights. The silence afterward was deafening. "Decision?" she asked. "Both alive," Sarah said between breaths. Hayes checked her clipboard. "Barely, but alive." Then softer, "You hesitated for 2 seconds when the radio died. In combat, that costs lives. Remember, composure isn't the absence of fear. It's control over it." Sarah nodded, chest still heaving. "Understood, ma'am." As the weeks passed, she learned more than medicine. She learned the language of chaos, the way gunfire sounded when it was close versus distant, the way adrenaline could sharpen vision until every heartbeat of another person felt like her own. But the training wasn't just designed to teach her. It was designed to break her, to see if she'd rebuild herself stronger. Peterson made sure of that. "Pain's not punishment," he told her during one grueling endurance march, his boots crunching beside hers. "It's a teacher. You listen, you learn. You ignore it, it'll kill you." By the time they reached the ridge, her muscles screamed. She dropped to one knee, gulping air. Peterson crouched beside her. "Still breathing?" "Barely." "Good," he said. "That means you've got more in you." Later, Mitchell checked on her progress. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone kept her standing straighter, sharper. "You're adapting," he said one evening after observing a medical field exercise. "Faster than expected." "I'm just trying to keep up," she replied. "Don't," he said simply. "You're not here to keep up. You're here to redefine what keeping up looks like." Those words stayed with her. On the toughest days, they became a lifeline. Weeks turned to months. The other recruits began to notice her absence from regular drills, then her return, bruised, exhausted, but sharper. When she walked into the mess hall now, the room quieted not from hostility but respect. Johnson, of all people, was the first to approach her again. "Martinez," he said awkwardly, tray in hand. "I wanted to say thanks." "For what?" "For proving we were wrong, about you, about a lot of things." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Just don't forget it." He smiled faintly. "Not a chance." That night after curfew, Sarah sat in the dark barracks with her small notebook, the one thing she allowed herself from civilian life. Inside were medical notes, sketches of techniques and quotes Miguel had written years ago. On the first page were his words, smudged but readable. "Service isn't about being unbreakable. It's about choosing to rebuild every time the world tests you." She read it until the letters blurred. The next morning, the testing began anew. Hayes and Peterson had designed a final phase of assessment before recommending her for Special Operations medical candidacy. It was called Condition Black, a 24-hour continuous field operation blending medical crises, combat stress, and survival. At dawn, they dropped her and 3 others, all advanced candidates, into the forest training zone with minimal supplies and a radio set to receive only. The mission brief was simple: survive, treat, and extract. The simplicity was a lie. Within the first hour, simulated artillery shook the ground. Fake casualties appeared. Sarah sprinted toward the first cry for help, adrenaline drowning thought. A man lay wounded, leg torn open, fake blood pumping. She worked quickly, applying a tourniquet, then heard movement behind her. Another casualty, 2 more. The noise of simulated gunfire crackled in the air. She worked without rest. Hours blurred into seconds. She crawled through mud, carried stretchers through tangled roots, bandaged, splinted, stabilized. When she thought she'd reached her limit, the scenario changed again: thunder, rain, cold. By nightfall she was soaked, trembling but still moving. At one point the radio hissed with static, Mitchell's voice faint. "Martinez, status." She wanted to answer, but the transmitter was disabled. The only reply was silence and the storm. She set up a makeshift shelter, triaged her patients, and used her own rations to simulate IV hydration. She hadn't eaten in 16 hours. Fatigue made the edges of her vision swim. But somewhere in the dark, a memory steadied her: Miguel's laugh, his hand ruffling her hair when she passed her EMT exams. When it gets impossible, little sister, that's when you find out who you really are. At dawn, the evaluators called it. Condition black ended. Sarah was the only one still fully functional, barely. When she stumbled into the debriefing tent, Peterson met her with a slow nod. "You didn't quit." "Didn't know I was allowed to." "Good answer." Hayes smiled faintly. "You've got judgment under stress most operators take years to learn." Mitchell entered quietly, clipboard under his arm. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched her drink water, her hands still trembling. Finally he said, "You ready to hear your results?" Sarah braced herself. "Yes, sir." Peterson stepped forward. "Martinez, you passed every standard. In 15 years of training, I've seen maybe a handful match your performance." Her chest tightened, relief mingled with disbelief. "From this point," Mitchell added, "you'll be recommended for advanced field medical training, the pipeline that leads to special operations medic certification. If you succeed, you'll deploy with SEAL Team 7. The room went still. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "Sir, SEAL Team." "You earned it," Mitchell interrupted. "Don't act surprised." "But—" "No but. Your brother's legacy may have brought you here, but you earned your way through the door." The words hit harder than any metal could. For months, she'd been fighting to prove that her surname wasn't a shortcut. Now, it was proof of strength, not privilege. Mitchell handed her a folded note. "Your brother wrote this after one of our missions. I kept it all these years. It's yours now." She opened it carefully. The paper was worn, the handwriting firm but fatting. "If you're reading this, James, it means I didn't make it. Tell Sarah that strength isn't loud. It doesn't have to be seen. Real strength shows up when nobody's watching." Her vision blurred, the ink smeared under her tears. Mitchell looked away, voice low. "He'd be proud of you." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind pushed against the tent, rattling it like breath. Sarah finally said, "Then I'll make sure I earn that pride every day." That night she walked alone to the far edge of the base where the ocean met the wire fence. Waves hissed against the shore, rhythmic, endless. She pulled the compass from her pocket, the one she'd carried since Miguel's funeral, and held it up to the moonlight. North, always north. The same direction her life had been pointing since the day she'd first put on the uniform. She whispered to the horizon, voice breaking but sure, "I'm ready, Miguel." And somewhere in the rhythm of the tide, she thought she heard the faint echo of his reply, "I know." What happens when the thing you've worked your whole life for finally arrives? And it terrifies you. That question pulsed through Sarah's veins as the helicopter lifted off from the training facility, blades hammering the air. The coastline disappeared beneath her, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't heading toward something safe. She was heading toward the place where people either proved themselves or broke trying. Below her, the Pacific shimmered like molten glass. The horizon stretched forever, and yet all she could think was, "What if I'm not ready?" Mitchell's voice echoed through the comms, calm as always. "Welcome to the beginning of your next chapter, Martinez. You've cleared more obstacles than most ever will, but from here on, no one cares what you did before. Only what you can do now." "Understood, sir," she replied. The helicopter banked toward a cluster of buildings perched near the edge of the coast, the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, home to the elite, and soon, maybe, home to her. When they landed, Sarah stepped out into wind and noise and the sharp smell of salt and gun oil. Around her, operators moved with the unhurried precision of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. Their uniforms were worn, their eyes calculating, their silence heavier than words. Mitchell led her across the tarmac. "You'll be embedded here for advanced medic integration. Observe, learn, adapt. You'll work with SEAL Team 7 during their preparation cycle." She nodded, trying not to stare at the insignia on the hangars, tridents, skulls, mottos carved into metal. This was another world. As they approached the team bay, voices and laughter filtered out through the open door. Inside, a group of men were gathered around a table covered in gear, weapons, medical kits, maps. The smell of coffee and cleaning solvent filled the air. The chatter died when they noticed her. Mitchell's tone turned authoritative. "Team, this is Hospital Corpsman recruit Sarah Martinez. She'll be training with us for the next several weeks." Someone whistled low. Another muttered, "Didn't know we were recruiting EMTs from Starbucks now." Laughter rippled, but it wasn't cruel, just the instinctive testing of a new arrival. Sarah stood tall. "Sir," she said, voice steady. Mitchell's eyes flicked across the group. "That will be enough. She's here because she earned it, and because I said so." Silence followed, the kind that carried weight. A tall man with a buzz cut stepped forward, extending a hand. "Petty Officer First Class Jackson," he said, "Team Comms." His grip was firm. "You hold your own and you'll fit in fine. We've seen medics come and go. Some make it, some don't." "I plan on making it," she said. He smirked, "We'll see." The rest introduced themselves in a blur of names: Brooks, Chen, Williams, Rodriguez. Each one evaluating her with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Training began before dawn the next day. The physical part was brutal, but Sarah had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the unspoken language of the team, the glances, the shorthand, the rhythm of trust that came from shared danger. Her job wasn't just to treat injuries. It was to learn them, how they moved, how they thought when they pushed too far. A medic wasn't just a healer. She was part psychologist, part tactician, part safety net. During one drill, Jackson twisted his ankle during a fast rope descent. Before anyone else reacted, Sarah was there, stabilizing, assessing, giving orders without hesitation. "Stay still," she said, wrapping the joint. "You keep putting weight on it and you'll be benched for a week." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You bossing me around already?" "Only when you're stupid." A beat of silence, then laughter broke out. Even Mitchell cracked a grin from where he observed. After the drill, Jackson approached her quietly. "Not bad, Doc. Most rookies freeze up when someone gets hurt." "Freezing costs time," she said. "Time costs lives." He nodded, serious now. "Guess you'll fit in after all." Days blurred into a rhythm of sweat, study, and exhaustion. By daylight, she trained in field medicine under live fire simulations. At night, she sat with manuals, learning advanced trauma protocols and tactical communication codes. Hayes visited occasionally to evaluate her progress. "You're adapting faster than expected," she told Sarah during one review. "But remember, knowledge doesn't save people. Judgment does." "I know," Sarah replied. "Every decision out there feels heavier now." "It should," Hayes said. "That's how you know you're ready for real responsibility." Her body ached constantly, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. The fear that had once whispered you don't belong was still there, but quieter now, drowned out by purpose. Still, there were nights she lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint echoes of Miguel's voice. "You don't get to choose when it gets hard. You only choose what you do next." She carried that thought into the next challenge, live mission simulation week. The exercise took place in a mock urban training site known as Little Mogadishu, concrete buildings, alleys, and sound effects mimicking gunfire, explosions, and chaos. It was designed to mirror a real-world raid, complete with injuries, civilians, and moral ambiguity. Sarah's role, field medic under pressure. Scenario starts now, Mitchell announced. Gunfire erupted instantly. The team moved in coordinated bursts, shadows flowing through narrow corridors. Sarah stayed behind the first assault element, med bag ready. Contact front, someone shouted. Two team members went down, one screaming, one silent. Smoke filled the air. Martinez, you're up. She dropped to her knees beside the wounded. One had a simulated chest wound, the other was unconscious. She checked for breathing, pulse, responsiveness. Training kicked in. Hands moved faster than thought. But then came the curveball, a civilian actor panicking nearby, blocking her path. Move, she shouted. I can't, the actor sobbed, scripted chaos pressing against her focus. Sarah grabbed his arm, guiding him behind cover. You want to live, then do exactly what I say. By the time she returned to her patient, his breathing had slowed. She forced herself calm, seal the wound, decompress, stabilize. The monitor beeped to life, still with her. Status, Jackson called out. Stable enough to move, she replied. Good, because we're not done yet. The team pushed forward, Sarah following with her pack bouncing against her back, adrenaline flooding every nerve. By the end of the exercise, she had treated 6 simulated casualties, coordinated 2 evacuations, and still managed to keep pace with the operators. When the final horn blew, the team gathered for debrief. Mitchell looked over the report. No missed steps, efficient triage, excellent communication. But, he paused, eyes locking on her, you second-guessed yourself twice when things got loud. You can't afford that hesitation in real combat. She nodded, understood, sir. Jackson grinned. Still, that was solid work, Doc, better than some medics we've had on deployment. Brooks added, you kept me breathing when I caught that shrapnel. I owe you a beer. Laughter filled the bay, genuine this time. For the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah felt something shift. She wasn't the outsider anymore. She was part of the rhythm. After the debrief, Mitchell pulled her aside. How does it feel to earn respect instead of demand it? She smiled faintly, heavier than I expected. Good, he said. That means it's real. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood alone on the training deck, moonlight washing over the concrete. The sea wind cut through her uniform, cool against her skin. She thought about the people who had doubted her, about the woman she'd been at boot camp, small, uncertain, trying to disappear. That version of herself felt like a ghost now. But ghosts never really left. They whispered in quiet moments, are you strong enough when it counts? The next morning answered that question in a way she hadn't anticipated. Peterson arrived unannounced, his presence like a storm in calm waters. Martinez, he said, gear up. You're joining the team for a live deployment drill. No simulations, real aircraft, real timing, only difference, no bullets. She stared. Sir, am I being evaluated? Always. Within the hour, she was aboard a C-130, seated between operators who barely spoke, their faces painted with focus. Mitchell sat across from her, checking his notes. This drill, he said, raising his voice above the engine's roar, is about readiness under fatigue. You'll be treating casualties under live extraction conditions. The helicopter won't wait. If you're late, you're left behind. She nodded. Her palms were slick inside her gloves. When they jumped, the world went silent except for wind. The parachute opened hard, jerking her back into awareness. The ground below was a blur of sand and shadow. Touchdown. She rolled, unhooked, sprinted toward the rendezvous. The exercise unfolded fast, too fast. Casualties everywhere, radios blaring, confusion intentional. Doc, over here. She crawled through the dirt toward the voice, adrenaline drowning thought. The training, the simulations, the sleepless nights, it all led to this. She found the wounded operator clutching his leg, fake blood spreading through his pants. She tore open the kit, hands steady even as her breath came ragged. Pressure dressing, IV morphine. She called out each step like a mantra, grounding herself in rhythm. Mitchell's voice crackled through comms. 1 minute to extraction. 1 minute, she hissed. The wound wasn't stabilized yet. Make it happen. Her pulse spiked. She worked faster, securing the dressing, checking vitals. When she finished, the team was already moving. She grabbed her gear and ran. They reached the helicopter as it lifted off, dust whipping through the air. She jumped, landing hard on the deck as the doors closed. The others laughed, slapping her shoulder. Nice timing, Doc. Mitchell just looked at her, cutting it close. I wasn't leaving him behind, she said. Good, he replied. Neither would your brother. The words hit her chest like gravity. As the helicopter banked toward base, Sarah looked out over the endless ocean below. For a moment, the sun broke through clouds, casting a path of light across the water. And she realized she wasn't chasing Miguel's shadow anymore. She was walking beside it. Sometimes, strength isn't found in the noise of victory or the weight of medals. Sometimes, it's in the quiet decision to keep going when everyone else has stopped. How do you know when training ends and reality begins? For Sarah, the line vanished the moment the door of the helicopter opened and the roar of desert wind hit her face. Below, a patch of hostile terrain shimmered in the heat. Somewhere inside that maze of sand and steel was a captured intelligence officer, and the team's job was to bring him home. For weeks, they'd trained for this, running scenarios until the body moved without thought. But this wasn't simulation. These bullets would be real. Mitchell's voice came through the comms. Remember, precision, communication, control. We're ghosts until we're not. Sarah nodded, clutching her medic pack like it was part of her body. Her pulse was steady, but her hands betrayed her, trembling just enough to remind her that fear wasn't gone. It was simply waiting its turn. They landed hard. Dust exploded around them. The air smelled of oil and heat and something metallic. The team split, 2 units moving around the compound's perimeter while Sarah followed the second wave through a breach in the wall. Gunfire cracked, sharp, rhythmic, controlled chaos. The noise rattled her bones, but she kept moving low and fast. 2 down, left corridor, someone shouted. Doc. She sprinted toward the voice. A SEAL was down, blood soaking his sleeve. The wound was deep but clean. She knelt, applied pressure, sealed it, then looked up. The man beside him was pale, breathing shallow, chest rising unevenly. Pneumothorax, she muttered. Without thinking, she pulled a decompression needle and inserted it just above the rib. A hiss escaped, and the man's breathing steadied. Thanks, Doc, he gasped. Don't thank me yet. Team moving, came over the radio. Extraction in 8 minutes. She finished dressing the wounds, gave each a pat on the shoulder. Stay with me. Move when I move. They limped toward the exit, rounds cracking off the walls. Sarah's heart pounded, but her movement stayed sharp, precise. Halfway to the extraction point, another explosion rocked the compound. The air filled with dust and screams. Through the smoke, she saw a civilian, a woman, crawling out of a collapsed doorway. Not part of the mission. Not supposed to be here. Doc, we have to go, Jackson shouted. Sarah hesitated. The woman's arm was pinned, blood pooling fast. Leaving her meant surviving. Saving her meant maybe not. She remembered Miguel's words. When it costs you something, that's when it counts. She ran toward the woman. Her gloves slipped on the rubble as she pried loose debris, voice steady despite the chaos. You're okay. I've got you. The woman's eyes were wide, terrified but alive. Sarah lifted her free, applied a pressure bandage, and half-dragged her toward the extraction point. Jackson appeared, cursing but grabbing the woman's other arm. Together they ran. The helicopter loomed ahead, its rotors whipping sand into blinding storms. Mitchell was already aboard, scanning for his team. When he saw Sarah, his jaw tightened, not in anger, but in something close to pride. They hauled the woman inside as the bird lifted. The desert fell away beneath them. Inside the cabin, Sarah checked vitals, voice calm despite the adrenaline tearing through her. The rescued officer was conscious. The woman was stable. Her teammates were alive. But she couldn't shake the tremor in her hands. Mitchell crouched beside her, shouting over the engine noise. "You did good, Martinez." She didn't look up. "I hesitated almost too long." "Hesitation's human," he said. "What matters is what you did after." She nodded, still pressing gauze against the woman's arm. The blood soaked through her gloves. It wasn't fake this time. When they landed back on the ship, the adrenaline crash hit like gravity. The injured were rushed to medical. The debrief began an hour later, silent and heavy. Mitchell stood before the team, the harsh fluorescent lights catching the dust still clinging to their uniforms. "No fatalities, mission success." Martinez, he paused, then said evenly, "made a call that wasn't in the playbook. It slowed extraction but saved a civilian life." He let that hang in the air. "Any of you have a problem with that?" No one spoke. Jackson broke the silence first. "She did the right thing." One by one, the others nodded. Mitchell looked back at her. "That's the thing about combat, Martinez. The line between right and wrong isn't drawn in black and white. It's drawn in blood, and you just try to make sure it's not someone else's more than it has to be." Later, when the noise of the debrief faded, Sarah stood alone on the deck. The sea stretched endless under a bruised orange sky. The salt wind stung her face. In her pocket, Miguel's compass pointed north, just as it always had. She thought of the woman's trembling hands, the panic in her eyes, the way her own heart had pounded with terror and purpose all at once. It struck her then, training hadn't prepared her to feel this much. The manuals never mentioned the weight that came after the mission, when silence returned and every heartbeat you saved echoed in your chest like a promise. She turned the compass in her fingers, whispering to the horizon, "You were right, Miguel. The hardest part isn't the danger, it's what comes after." Somewhere behind her, the ship's bell rang for night rotation. The sea swallowed the sound, leaving only the steady rhythm of waves, relentless, eternal, like the pulse of a life dedicated to something larger than itself. Sometimes duty doesn't roar, it whispers. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is listen. What do you do after the noise stops? That question haunted Sarah more than any firefight ever could. Days after the mission, the ship returned to base. The men joked, cleaned their rifles, traded stories about near misses. But Sarah stayed silent. Her gloves still smelled faintly of blood, and sometimes when she washed her hands, she swore she could see it in the sink vanishing but never gone. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it brought flashes, the woman's terrified eyes, the hiss of escaping air from the decompression needle, the sound of the helicopter door slamming shut. Then the silence, always the silence. She started waking before dawn again, running the perimeter until her lungs burned. The motion helped, the stillness didn't. Mitchell noticed first. One evening he found her sitting alone on the dock, boots dangling over the water, staring at the reflection of the moon. "You're not sleeping," he said. She didn't turn. "Does anyone?" He sat beside her, the boards creaking under his weight. "Not for long, but you learn to live with it." She exhaled slowly. "That woman, the civilian, I keep seeing her face, and every time I do I wonder, what if I'd been 2 seconds slower? What if?" Mitchell interrupted gently. "You can drive yourself mad with what if. Every medic does, every operator too, but we don't live there, we learn, then we move." "I'm trying," she said softly, "but it's like the mission never ended." He looked out over the dark water. That's because it doesn't, not really. You just carry pieces of it until you figure out where to put them. They sat in silence for a while, the night air thick with salt and memory. Then he added, "Sarah, you did good out there. You saved more than you lost. That's the best any of us ever do." She nodded, though she didn't believe it yet. In the days that followed, she threw herself deeper into work, teaching trauma drills to new recruits, volunteering for extra rotations, anything to keep from thinking too long. But even the constant motion couldn't hide the moments between. The quiet pauses where the world felt too still, too clean, like something sacred had been broken and no one noticed. During one late-night debrief, Hayes found her reviewing mission footage. "You've watched that recording 5 times," Hayes said softly. "7, Sarah admitted. "I'm looking for what I missed." "You didn't miss anything. There's always something." Hayes stepped closer, her expression softening. "You're not broken, Sarah. You're just awake now. And once you're awake to how fragile life is, it's hard to unsee it." Sarah looked at the paused frame, her kneeling beside the wounded operator, dust swirling around her. "Why didn't anyone warn me how heavy it feels afterward?" "Because no one would sign up if they did," Hayes said, "and because words can't really explain it. You only understand once it's yours to carry." For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to stop moving, to feel it all. Later that week, she visited the base memorial, a low wall of names etched in steel, catching the morning light. She found Miguel's easily. She always could. Her fingertips traced the letters. "I think I get it now," she whispered. "You didn't want me to follow you because it was easy. You wanted me to understand why it mattered." The wind carried the faint hum of the ocean, steady, eternal. Behind her, footsteps approached. Jackson stopped beside her, quiet for once. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You didn't." He studied the wall. Every name here has a story. Every story has someone still trying to make sense of it. She glanced at him. "You too." He gave a small nod. "First deployment, I lost my best friend. Took me a year to stop blaming myself. You never really stop, you just learn how to live with ghosts." Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what we all are, just different kinds of ghosts." "Maybe," he said. "But you're one of the ones who keeps people alive long enough to become one." They both laughed softly, because the alternative was crying. After that day, something shifted. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they stopped controlling her. She started visiting the infirmary in the evenings, teaching the new medics quiet things that manuals never mentioned: how to talk to the dying, how to steady your breath when blood loss becomes too much to look at, how to know when saving one means losing another. One young recruit asked her, "Ma'am, how do you deal with it when you fail?" Sarah hesitated, then said quietly, "You don't. You just make sure you never let it stop you from trying again." Her reputation grew quietly, the way real ones do. Operators trusted her judgment. Command respected her instincts. But beneath it all, she never let herself forget that she wasn't invincible, that every time she patched a wound, she carried a piece of it with her. Months passed. New missions came and went. Some were clean, others weren't. The team learned to read the silence in her eyes, a silence born not of weakness but of understanding. One evening, Mitchell called her into his office. "You're due for rotation stateside," he said. "You could teach at Quantico, safer, better hours." Sarah looked at him, then at the orders on the desk. "You think I need a break?" "I think you've earned one." She thought for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "I'll go, but only to teach what can't be taught from a book." Mitchell's mouth twitched. "That's what I hoped you'd say." When she walked out into the fading sunset, the base was alive with noise, engines, shouts, laughter, life going on. She stood there, breathing it in, realizing for the first time that survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about grace, the quiet choice to keep showing up. Later, standing by the ocean again, She whispered the words she wished Miguel could hear. "You were right, brother. Strength doesn't roar, it breathes." The wind carried her voice out to sea, soft but certain. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't hurt. Sometimes, healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about learning to walk beside it and still move forward. Why do we return to the places that once broke us? Sarah asked herself that as the transport plane leveled out over the Atlantic, the world below reduced to clouds and silence. She'd been stateside for almost a year, teaching medics how to think under pressure, how to find calm inside the storm. But when Mitchell called and said simply, "They need you," she hadn't hesitated. Maybe because part of her never really left. Now she sat among operators she didn't know, the hum of the engines vibrating through the deck. Their faces were younger, restless, the kind of men who hadn't yet learned that bravery and fear are made of the same bones. Across from her, Jackson grinned, the only familiar one. "Guess the rumors were true. Couldn't stay away, huh?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Someone has to make sure you idiots come back in one piece." "Good to have you, Doc." The mission brief was simple on paper and impossible in practice. Extract a downed reconnaissance team deep inside hostile mountain terrain. No comms, no backup, just 6 people in the dark. She listened, quiet as ever, absorbing every detail, every risk. The only sound louder than her heartbeat was the whisper of Miguel's compass in her pocket, tapping softly against her leg. When the plane doors opened hours later, night swallowed them whole. Cold air bit through their gear as they descended into the valley below. The snow muffled everything, their steps, their breath, even their fear. They moved in silence, moonlight glinting off rifles. Sarah's world narrowed to what her hands could do, what her eyes could catch. Somewhere out there, a group of soldiers was bleeding, freezing, waiting for help that might never come. "Movement 2 o'clock, Jackson whispered through comms. Shapes emerged ahead, 3 men huddled beside a makeshift fire. American uniforms. One waved weakly. "Doc," Jackson murmured, "you're up." Sarah rushed forward, dropping to her knees. Frost clung to the wounded like another layer of skin. One had a broken leg, another a chest wound that bled with every breath. The third was unconscious, pulse faint. She went to work, hands steady despite the cold. Tourniquets, pressure dressings. IV fluids warmed against her own body heat. The world around her disappeared until there was only breath, blood, and the faint hum of life refusing to quit. "Extraction in 10, Mitchell's voice crackled faintly through comms. Sarah looked up at the ridge where they'd have to climb with the injured. Her arms already ached from the cold, but she nodded. "We'll be ready." Then the gunfire started. It was distant at first, then closer, ricochets snapping through the trees. The team dove for cover, shouting over the radio. "Contact North Ridge. Doc, stay low." But Sarah was already moving toward the unconscious man, shielding him with her body as snow exploded around them. She could hear Jackson's rifle barking in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Extraction in 3, someone yelled. "Not without him," she shouted back. 2 operators grabbed the stretcher, lifting the man as Sarah kept pressure on his wound. They ran, slipping, sliding, half carrying, half dragging. The sound of incoming fire chased them through the dark. The helicopter appeared like a miracle, its searchlight cutting through the blizzard. Sarah felt the downdraft whip her hair as she climbed aboard last, still holding the patient's hand. As the chopper lifted, Jackson collapsed beside her, breathing hard. "You're insane," he said, half laughing. She smiled. "You're welcome." When the adrenaline faded, the shaking began. Her gloves were slick with blood again. Different man, different place, same color. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. Back at base, the medics took over. 2 of the rescued would live, 1 wouldn't. That night, Sarah sat alone in the temporary barracks, the hum of generators filling the silence. She opened her notebook, the same one she'd carried since training. Most pages were filled now, notes, sketches, fragments of thoughts. She wrote slowly, each word heavy but sure. Today I remembered why we keep going. Not because we expect to save everyone, but because sometimes saving one is enough to keep the world from breaking completely. A knock at the door pulled her back. Mitchell stepped inside, Frost still clinging to his coat. "Heard you kept everyone breathing." "Almost everyone," she said quietly. He nodded, understanding without needing details. "You did what you could. That's all any of us ever do." She looked up at him. "Is it ever enough?" He hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe not for us, but for them it always is." He left her with that. When morning came, the mountains glowed gold under the first light. Sarah walked outside, the cold cutting sharp against her lungs. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the compass, and watched the needle quiver north. There was no peace in what she did, no glory, only the quiet certainty that she was where she needed to be. For a long time she stood there, letting the wind whip her hair, the weight of the world balanced in her chest. Then she whispered the words that had become her prayer, her purpose, her truth. "Sometimes all we can do is hold the line a little longer." And maybe that was enough. What happens when the mission finally ends? No one ever tells you, because for most soldiers it never really does. Months passed after the mountain rescue. The rhythm of duty continued: briefings, deployments, evacuations, silence. The same cycle, only each time Sarah felt the weight a little differently. Not heavier, just clearer. One evening, as she packed for what she thought would be another rotation, Mitchell called her into his office. His tone was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "You're being reassigned," he said. She blinked. "To where?" "Medical liaison, humanitarian division, civilian regions, non-combat zones." She frowned. "That's not what I trained for." "No," Mitchell said softly. "It's what you became ready for." He handed her a file. Inside were photographs, children in refugee camps, old men missing limbs, families caught in the wake of wars that never made the news. "Your skill set isn't just about saving soldiers," he said. "It's about saving what's left of people after the war ends." She closed the folder. "You really think I can make a difference there?" He looked her in the eye. "You already have, you just don't see it yet." She left the next morning. The desert she returned to wasn't one of gunfire and commands, but of silence and rebuilding. She moved through makeshift clinics built from shipping containers, tending to wounds that weren't measured in blood, hunger, grief, fear. At first, she didn't know how to speak to them, these civilians who didn't care about rank or ribbons. But then she realized something simple. They didn't need a soldier. They needed someone who remembered what humanity felt like. So she listened. She learned the language of pain without translation. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand what Miguel had meant all along. One night she sat outside her tent beneath a sky so full of stars it looked like the world had cracked open. In her hand, she held the compass. The metal had dulled with time, but the needle still pointed true. She thought of her brother, of his laughter, his stubbornness, the tattoo on her arm that matched his, the one everyone had once mocked in boot camp, the mark she used to hide beneath her sleeve. Now she traced it with her thumb and smiled. It wasn't just ink anymore. It was memory, proof that even in loss, love left something permanent. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Doctor." She turned. A young girl stood at the edge of the light, clutching a stuffed bear missing one eye. Sarah smiled softly. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" The girl held out her arm, a small scrape already scabbing. "It hurts." Sarah knelt, cleaning it gently. "You'll be okay," she said. The girl studied her face, then asked, "Are you a soldier?" Sarah hesitated. "I was." The girl tilted her head. "And now?" Sarah looked down at the tiny wound, then back at the stars. Now I just help people find their way home." The girl smiled, nodded, and ran off into the glow of lanterns. Sarah watched her go, her heart full and aching all at once. Later, she wrote in her notebook one final time, "War teaches you how to survive, but peace teaches you why." Weeks later, her rotation ended. She packed her gear slowly, deliberately, as though each item was a piece of the woman she'd been: the medic, the soldier, the sister. She didn't know if she'd ever wear the uniform again, and for the first time, that thought didn't hurt. Before leaving, she walked once more to the edge of the desert. The wind carried dust across the horizon, glowing gold in the dying light. She whispered into the emptiness, "I kept going, Miguel, not because I had to, because you showed me how." She placed the compass on the ground, a quiet offering, and stepped back. The needle spun once, then settled, still pointing north. She smiled. As she turned to leave, the camera of life might have pulled back, the lone figure walking across endless sand, the wind catching her hair, the world bathed in fatting amber. No medals, no speeches, just one woman who had finally learned that strength isn't measured by what you endure, but by what you choose to heal. And as her footsteps disappeared into the horizon, the narrator's voice might have said what she never could. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.